Gilgeous Alexander. Shabbat for three. Bingo!
Carter will get it for the win. Got it! He is hard to believe.
Here's Jordan.
Yes. The Magic, a 360 turn with the dribble. Magic down the middle. Gives underneath the Worthy. Slam dunk.
Third in the corner. Double fake.
Who were your, sports heroes growing up in New York as a kid?
I think the first one was Mickey Mantle. I was a Yankee fan. The first baseball game I ever went to, Roger Maris hit his 61st home run, breaking Babe Ruth's record.
Wow.
I think at the moment I was bent over because I had dropped a hot dog on the ground and the ball went shooting out into right field, and I think I might have missed it, but I heard the cheer, stood up and cheered, and became part of the experience. So the Yankees, Roger Maris, Mickey Mantle, the 60s Yankees were huge. As we moved into basketball with the Knicks, I think guys like Dave DeBusschere and Bill Bradley. I loved the team game. Yeah. I was always enamored of watching just the fluidity with which these guys played together. And I thought that the 69-70 Knicks completely embodied the team concept. So all of those guys, Bradley, DeBusschere, Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Dick Barnett, Cazzie Russell, Dave Stallworth going down the line to Phil Jackson at the end of the bench.
Yeah.
They were big heroes.
So what was the scene like? Do you remember? Give me some memories of that year. Playing the Lakers. They had their superstars with Wilt, Jerry West, and Elgin Baylor. What was the city like at that time?
Well, I was a little kid still.
Yeah.
So a lot of those memories are memories in the dark of lying in my bedroom listening to the games on my AM clock radio.
Who was the announcer?
It was Marv Albert.
Wow.
And so to me, the voice of the Knicks and basketball has always been Marv Albert. Mm-hmm. And I think, Marv Albert came out of a tradition. He was a protege of Marty Glickman. Mm-hmm. Marty Glickman, who really was the dean of announcers, who announced Giant games, Jet games, Knick games, Ranger games, high school games, NASCAR, whatever. He just... and a little known fact that I want to interject about Marty Glickman. Marty Glickman was on the 1936 U.S. Olympic team. He was supposed to run the 400-meter relay, but he was Jewish. And at the last minute, he and the other Jewish runner, a guy named Sam Stoller, were pulled out of the relay. Never was really said, but in deference to Adolf Hitler, noted anti-Semite.
Wow.
And Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf were inserted into the relay, which they won by 15 yards running away. But so Marty Glickman was an athlete who became an announcer, had a big influence on Marv. And so listening to Marv call things, it was just, so the Knicks were Marv to me.
Yeah.
And the excitement that he could generate on a radio broadcast, because most games were not televised. To me, I'd be lying in bed at night listening, and I felt like I was in the Garden.
Do you remember any moment, like, for example, Jerry West's half-court heave in Game 3?
Awful. Listening to the game.
Oh, you were
the
listening
Knicks
to
are going to win the game.
You did end up winning that game, though.
Well, but I thought, correct me if I'm wrong. So, Jerry, I just remember that 60-foot shot.
Yeah, tied the game, sent it to overtime.
Okay. But what I remember most is Marv's calling of Willis Reed coming out for Game 7. After he was injured in Game 6, New York press then wrote off the Knicks, figured, well, that's it. And this guy, you hear Marv, his voice getting more and more excited as Willis comes limping out of the tunnel. And he's coming onto the court, and he's taking a couple of shots. It was just huge. And I remember the Knicks went on, obviously, to win the game. Yeah. But all we talked about on the school bus the next day was Willis coming out and how memorable it was because Marv was able to do that for us.
So a lot of people have talked about how Clyde Frazier had such an incredible game that night, but it doesn't really it gets overshadowed by the Willis come out. Obviously, Willis coming out was huge for, he was the MVP that year, Finals MVP, All-Star MVP, won them all. But that game was such 36 points, 19 assists for Frazier, and I feel like he gets left out of the fold. I mean, how popular were these guys like Frazier, Reed at the time?
Ridiculously popular. I mean, they were cultural icons, just like that year Joe Namath was. The city was alive. Again, I was really young, so I was 14 or 15, living on Long Island, so I don't have the city experience from that. But you'd see these guys in the newspaper, and you'd see them on the sports shows. Clyde was a flashy dresser.
Still is.
So, there'd be stories about that. But they were celebrated, and you would hear all about them all the time.
Did you think Willis is more popular than Patrick Ewing?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Because they obviously had the second. Do you have any better? Which title do you think is more memorable? I feel like the 70 one is the one everyone talks about, but 73 are a little older.
It was the first one.
Yeah, but then obviously you have guys like Earl the Pearl and Jerry Lucas come in, and
they were fabulous.
Yeah,
and celebrated too. But I think it was, first of all, that was also a magical year in New York because it was the year the Mets won too. So New York was alive. And not to take away from the 73 one, which was fantastic too, but the first one was just so new.
Yeah.
And the Knicks were so newly good because they'd only been good for a year or two before that, that, they sort of New York came to expect, unreasonably, obviously, because it's so hard to repeat and to, play at that high a level. But the 73 one was strong. I think the 71 was just, off the charts.
I had two questions about the Knicks, actually, before we moved on. One was, do you have any recollection of the year after where they lost to it was going to be, everyone was talking about them versus Milwaukee in the finals when the Bucks got Oscar Robertson, but the Knicks lost in a Game 7 to the Baltimore Bullets, who at that time had Gus Johnson, Wes Unseld, and
Jack Marin.
And Earl the Pearl. Do you have any recollection of that at all?
I think that what happens to lots of teams, the expectations are so high that they just can't reach it. And
Baltimore had a good matchup.
There were a lot of strong teams in the East.
Yeah, people don't really feel like, besides the Celtics, and I feel like, obviously the Knicks that won, we don't talk about how much talent that Eastern Conference really had anymore in basketball talk, and it's a shame because the East now is it's been the weaker conference for 20 years. But
It's coming on.
It's coming on for sure, but that late 60s East, you had the Sixers with Billy Cunningham and Hal Greer. And
Oscar Robertson on the Royals.
Yeah, and they weren't even making the playoffs. Like, that's how good the East was. They couldn't even make the playoffs. But my other question was, how did it feel to see the Knicks fall from that embodied team, championships, to becoming,
awful.
Yeah.
Because then you were wandering in the desert, and you kept hoping because Red Holtzman kept coaching for a bunch of years, but they never could find the same formula. I remember the year that they basically traded everybody and just kept Patrick Ewing, and then figured, well, we're going to just build the whole team around him, and it never seemed to work.
Those 90s Knicks got pretty close. I mean, 1994, Game 7, then 99 made it back to the finals, but yeah, it didn't materialize. And then I feel like after Ewing, it's really been like a shit show over there.
I think a lot of that has to do with the Madison Square Garden management and the
ownership.
The Dolan family's prioritization of profits over product. Yeah. Because they know that New York fans are going to show up anyway. And so they haven't been great owners. They won't relinquish because they got a great deal. And I think they've hurt the franchise, which seems to be, knock on wood, and thankfully on the rebound.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you think the Knicks, I know I've been to one Knicks game. That's where I got this shirt, actually. But they have an amazing fan base, dedicated, seem very into basketball. But would you say that the Yankees in baseball are still the number one in New York? Or does it really depend on who's winning?
Yeah, New Yorkers are loyal, but they love winners. I mean, I'm a Giant fan as well, and that's dreadful. That's just a horrible feeling. I described it recently as there being no safety bar, or the safety bar on the roller coaster not being able to come up, so you're locked in for the ride, and you just have to take it.
You've seen a couple of Super Bowls, though, in your time.
But as a longtime Giant fan, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You never feel comfortable in success. So even as they're about to clinch the victory, you're going, no, something's going to happen. Norwood's going to hit that field goal. They're going to choke. I feel that way with the Yankees. I feel that way with, the Knicks.
Yeah.
You're never certain of victory. And even after the game, you're going, they really won that? Pinch me. Did they really win that?
So really, there's no team that stands out in terms of, like, when this team is winning, the whole city cares more than anyone else.
I think the city embraces all their teams. I think they trash all their teams as well. When the Rangers were on a good run a couple of years ago, the city everybody was a Ranger fan. So I think the city is just a great sports city. They're alive to their sports, but they need to be convinced as well.
Yeah.